Today we're out here taking a look at the 2015 Dodge Challenger. This particular version is the RT with the Scat pack option, which means we have the 6.4-liter Hemi V8 engine under the hood. On the surface, it may seem like very little has changed between the 2014 and 2015 model year, but those differences are far more than skin deep. It's obvious that the Challenger is a retro-themed vehicle. This was specifically designed after the 1971 Dodge Challenger. However, nothing else about this vehicle is retro. Everything else about this is thoroughly modern. We have 2.6 times the number of gears we had in 1971, more than twice the fuel economy. It's faster 0 to 60 by 33%, and that's all despite being bigger and heavier than that 1971 model. Up front, we get a revised front end versus the 2014 model. It's not too different, but it is subtly changed from that previous year. If you get the top end Hellcat model, we get a different grille going on right here and much larger grille openings right down below. All models have standard projector headlamps, but HIDs are optional, so those base projectors are halogen lamps. Our model has the optional fog lamps, the optional radar cruise control, which is that sensor right there in the middle, and we also have this optional chin spoiler right down below. There are a variety of different hoods available depending on which version of the Challenger you get. There are even some retro shaker hoods where the intake for the engine actually protrudes out of the hood so you can see the engine rattling around inside. If you didn't know it already, at 197.7 inches long, the Challenger is a really, really big two-door vehicle. This is actually 6 inches longer than the 1971 version of the Challenger, even though that Challenger was a really big vehicle back in the 70s. The big difference between the 20th and the 21st century Challengers is mainly right here in the hood proportion, because that 70s vehicle had a longer hood. We have a little bit more interior room as a result in this vehicle, and it all comes down to more efficient packaging in this century than the last. Comparisons with the Mustang and the Camaro are inevitable with the Challenger, but those are comparisons that I've always felt a little bit uncomfortable about, because this is quite a different kind of vehicle than the Mustang especially. This is a full 10 inches longer than the Mustang. It also seats 5, not 4. The same thing goes for the Chevy Camaro. It only seats 4. This again seats 5, and this is about 8 inches longer than the Camaro. Putting the Challenger in European terms may help a little bit. The Challenger is based off of the Chrysler 300 and the Dodge Charger. The Chrysler 300 and the Charger are actually Mercedes-Benz E-Class based vehicles, back when Chrysler and Mercedes were the same company. Except that Chrysler didn't just take the E-Class and put a Chrysler logo on the front of it, they made it much bigger than the E-Class. They took it and they stretched it in pretty much every dimension, making it about the same size as the BMW 7 Series. And this is the coupe version of those same two vehicles. As a result, the German correlation for the Challenger is more of a BMW 6 Series than a BMW 3 Series or 4 Series. When you take a look at the Mustang is definitely trying to be the American version of the BMW 3 Series coupe, now known as the BMW 4 Series coupe, whereas this is a very different vehicle. It's much larger, it's wider, it's also, most importantly, heavier. Between this wide wheelbase stretches a vehicle that weighs between 3,843 and 4,449 pounds. As tested, 4,250 with the 6.4-liter V8 engine. The 6.2-liter is actually a little bit heavier because of all the added plumbing for that supercharging system. That's an awful lot heavier than you'll find the current 2015 Mustang, which weighs in between 3,526 pounds and 3,705 pounds. Weight distribution and weight balance are also very important factors out on the road. The V6 version of the Challenger is fairly well balanced at 52% to the front, 48% to the rear. When you add the 6.4-liter V8 engine, that goes down to 55, 45, and when you take a look at the Hellcat, it is decidedly front heavy at 57% up front, 43% in the rear. There are actually front-wheel drive vehicles that have a very similar weight proportion to the Hellcat V8 version of the Challenger. That front-heavy weight balance is not unique in this segment. The Ford Mustang with the 4-cylinder engine has a very similar weight balance to the V6 version of the Challenger, and the GT has a very similar weight balance to the 6.4-liter V8 version. However, Chevy's Camaro is much closer to 50-50 than any of the other entries in this segment. It is noticeable out on the road. Out back, the changes are just as subtle as they were up front. We have a new tail lamp arrangement, again crossing over from the trunk lid over here to the body portion of the vehicle. This is a very retro-styled rear end, and I say that not just because of the overall style, but also because of the way the trunk lid interacts with the vehicle. A lot of modern vehicles, the opening for the trunk goes an awful lot lower. This really is more of a trunk lid than a trunk hatch, like you'll find on most modern vehicles. The tail lamps are now all LED. We have this LED turn signal lamp right over here on this side in red, brake lamp right here in the center, and this portion right here mirrors what you see in the Dodge Charger as well as the Dodge Durango. There's some big changes underneath the hood for the 2015 model year. Things start out with a 3.6-liter V6 engine in the SXT model that produces 305 horsepower and 268 pound-feet of torque. That engine is mated only to an 8-speed automatic transmission, sending power, of course, to the rear wheels. We then have an optional 5.7-liter V8 Hemi engine. It produces 372 horsepower with the automatic transmission, or 375 horsepower if you get it with the manual transmission. The model we're taking a look at right here is the 6.4-liter V8 engine. It's related to that 5.7-liter Hemi engine. It produces 485 horsepower and 475 pound-feet of torque, which is up a little bit from last year. It gets the same horsepower and torque figures regardless of which transmission you get. You get the 6-speed manual transmission or the 8-speed automatic transmission. We then have one of the most insane engines that Chrysler has ever produced. It's a 6.2-liter supercharged V8 engine. It produces 707 horsepower and 650 pound-feet of torque. You'll find that in the Hellcat model. That's mated to a 6-speed manual transmission or an 8-speed automatic transmission. The 8-speed ZF automatic transmission that the 6.2-liter V8 engine uses is quite unique. It's also quite rare because it's only used in Rolls-Royce and Bentley models, and that would be the very top-end Rolls-Royce and Bentley model because it's designed to handle the kind of power that you can get out of a supercharged large displacement V8 engine or the twin-turbo V12s that you'll find in the Rolls-Royce models. For reference, that is 7 more horsepower than you'll find in a Lamborghini Aventador. Fuel economy figures come in all across the board depending on which engine you get, but there's absolutely nothing retro about the fuel economy in the Dodge Challenger. That's because despite this being a large push-rodded V8 engine, there's nothing retro about the engine itself. It actually is a thoroughly modern design with 2 spark plugs per cylinder. They use 2 spark plugs to improve the flame front and improve efficiency. We also have a variable displacement system which allows this engine to run as a 4-cylinder engine when you're out on the highway. That seriously improves your highway fuel economy numbers, especially if you're going below about 75 miles an hour or so. Fuel economy comes in the best in the 3.6-liter V6 version, getting 30 miles per gallon highway. I'll let you refer to that chart over there on the side. And of course, the Hellcat will be the worst at 13 miles per gallon city, 21 highway, and 16 combined. The big takeaway, however, is that Hellcat really is not as bad as it could be. A 707 horsepower engine that gives you 22 miles per gallon on the highway is an incredible number. And this 6.4-liter V8 version that we're looking at right here with the 8-speed automatic transmission gives you 25 miles per gallon on the highway. If you treat it gently, keep your speeds below 70 miles an hour on the open highway, on level highway, with the air conditioning on, you can get almost 29 miles per gallon. Putting the power to the ground are these 245/45 ZR20s on our particular model. It's important to keep in mind because even though we have nearly 500 horsepower in this vehicle, we only have 245 width tires in the back. You will find wider tires on both SRT versions of the Challenger. However, those only jump up to 275, so you will still find wider tires on some of the European competition. If you're wondering about aftermarket wheel improvements, I am told by Chrysler that there are some differences to the wheel wells in the SRT models to make those larger tires and wheels fit. Wider tires would obviously improve the acceleration time by giving you some added grip, but they actually reduce the fun factor when you're out on your favorite track because you don't get as much lively action going on in the rear. Front seat comfort comes in at 8 out of 10 points. We have an electrically operating tilt telescopic steering wheel and a multi-way power driver's seat. One important thing to keep in mind is the Challenger does not get an electrically operated recline. It is still a manual mechanism that makes it a little bit easier to get in and out of the back quickly. We do have an optional 4-way adjustable lumbar support, which does help improve front seat comfort. One complaint about the last generation Challenger's front seats is still a little bit true for this seat. It feels like you're sitting on the seat, not in the seat. That's just the way the seat is shaped. The bottom cushion is a little bit stiff. It does feel like you're kind of sitting on something rather than really being nestled in the seat. Part of that is also because the seat is nice and wide, so larger or wider people will have no problem finding a very comfortable seating position, but does mean that these side bolsters are a little bit further out than my sides. Getting in and out of the back seat is an awful lot easier than the vast majority of these 2-door coupes along the lines of a Camaro, Mustang, or even a Hyundai Genesis. I also have an awful lot more room in this back seat than I have in the variety of those other coupes. When it comes to rear seat comfort, I'll give this 10 out of 10 points, but it's important to keep in mind that my scores should only be compared within the same category. So you should only compare these comfort scores to other 2-door coupes out there. Obviously, this rear seat is not as comfortable as you'll find in a long wheelbase Mercedes-Benz S-Class, which also scores 10 out of 10 points, but this is easily one of the most comfortable 2-door coupes I've ever been in. This front seat is adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. I have about 3 inches of legroom left there, and even though my hair is brushing the ceiling in the back, I could sit this way comfortably for a number of hours. More importantly than anything else, however, is that we actually have a middle seat right back here in the Challenger and a 5th seatbelt, so we can actually carry 5 people. Admittedly, you need to be fairly short in order to use this center seat because these outboard seats are very bucket shaped. I do have to cock my head to one side in order to sit back here, but the important thing is that we do have the seatbelt, so we could do it if we needed to. The middle seat is important for another reason, however. I was actually able to put a rearward facing child seat right here in the middle with the two front seats adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. That's not something you can do in any of those other two-door coupes with which this competes because they don't have a center seat in order to put something like that in. So you'd have to put the rearward facing child seat perhaps over here on the passenger side, move it an awful lot further up, not nearly as convenient. Rear passengers also get softly padded armrests on either side of the vehicle as well as right here in the center with two very large cup holders. Further improving the practicality, the rear seat backs do fold down in a 60-40 folding arrangement and the trunk pass-through is quite large. As we take a look around the interior, keep in mind that options do change from trim level to trim level. We have fixed headrests right there in the rear passenger compartment for the two outboard seats. We also have side curtain airbags and a tweeter right there. Front seat occupants get these large two-way adjustable headrests, and we have fixed seat belts right there. They do come off the loop to make it easier to get in and out of the back. The Scat Pack is a version of the RT trim, so we have RT embroidered right there on the faux suede portion of the seat. This is an optional seat covering in our particular trim. It is a combination of a leather interior as well as this faux suede. The front doors now contain more soft touch plastics than they did before. The vast majority of the door is a soft touch plastic part. So we have soft touch upper, soft touch middle right there, very soft touch armrest, and then we have this very uniquely positioned door release handle right there. A lot of people did find that difficult to find. Bottle holder right down here, and then the lower portion of the door is all hard plastic. Moving over to the dashboard, we have air vents that say Challenger on them right there on the passenger side, and if we zoom out, you'll find a soft touch injection molded upper dashboard that is styled in a very retro fashion. We have a large glove box positioned right below that, storage tray up there, and a large bin right below it. Like the exterior, the interior is loosely styled after the 1971 Dodge Challenger, which really accounts for this dashboard shape going on right here in the center, and the controls that are divorced from that infotainment display right below it. A major change for 2015 bringing the Challenger up to the 21st century is this 8.4-inch color touchscreen infotainment and navigation system. Navigation is optional on the Challenger, but this is a big improvement from the last generation of Challenger, which received Chrysler's last generation infotainment systems. Because this is the most recent Chrysler infotainment system, you should know that there is no standard optical disc player in the dashboard. Moving down from there, we have the start-stop button from the engine, and if we continue on down, you'll find the controls for that infotainment and navigation system, as well as a few other vehicle controls. The sport button is fairly self-explanatory. This controls the way the transmission shifts, the way the throttle behaves, as well as the way the steering and a few other vehicle systems behave. The Super Track Pack button is really just a shortcut to a particular screen in this Uconnect infotainment system. So if I press that, it brings you right over here to the standard SRT Performance Control screen. You find this on the Scat Pack, as well as the SRT versions of the Challenger. This is where you can activate launch control. You can also change the way the different drive modes behave. So you can set up the standard mode or you can set up the sport mode. You can see we can control the way the transmission and engine behave, the paddle shifters, traction control, as well as the steering on the vehicle. Also in the performance pages, we have access to vehicle timers. So for instance, 0 to 60 timers, quarter-mile timers, eighth-mile timers, etc. We have a few extra gauges as well. Coolant temperature, oil pressure. We also have another page, battery voltage, intake air temperature, transmission temperature. We have a G-force readout that lets you see what the G's you're getting right here as you go along the track. And then we can also get a readout of our engine. This shows you how much horsepower and how much torque the engine is producing at the current moment, as well as what gear you're in and the oil pressure, as well as the digital speedometer readout. If you want to know more about Uconnect, then go ahead and click that banner at the bottom of your screen. You'll be taken on over to a dedicated video review of Uconnect in a different Chrysler vehicle. It's not one in this Challenger, but does go over all the basic features of this system. Moving on down the center console, we have this T-shaped shifter. The button's right over here on the left side. Pull it all the way down for drive, as you can see right there. Button right over here is required for most shift maneuvers. We can pull it over to the left, and then we get manual mode. You can see that the mode lights up right here in red. Down for up and up for down, which is a little bit backwards from some vehicles. We do also get paddle shifters. Small storage cubby right over there was not able to fit an iPhone 5 or iPhone 6 sized device in that cubby, but you can put things like your vehicle's key right in there. Below the shifter, we have two very large cup holders, easily able to accommodate large takeout sodas. Behind the cup holders, we have a softly padded center armrest. We have these little cutouts right here so that way cables can come through relatively easily. It opens sideways like that away from the driver. This is where you'll find the auxiliary input, USB input, as well as the SD card slot for the system. The SD card slot is not used for mapping. This is actually used for music input. We also have a 12-volt power outlet. So you can see it's a fairly deep storage compartment. I have a phone in there. I also have a wallet in there and a few other goodies. Moving over to the instrument cluster, you can see we have retro-themed dials. That needle floats sort of right behind that disc, as you can see right over there as we rev the engine. We also have single digits right up there, and then between them we have 500, 1500, 2500, etc. The speedometer on the right side is themed very similarly, and if we move on over to the center, we have a large 7-inch multi-information display right there between the speedometer and the tachometer. The display is controlled with this 5-button joystick control on the left side of the steering wheel, OK, up, down, and side to side. The display features 2 fixed gauges. We have engine temperature on the left and fuel level on the right. You can also use this button to scroll through various different features in the system like trip computer, A and B, access to our speedometer in a digital format for easier readability, vehicle info. This is where you'll find some additional gauges, engine torque like we saw in that center display, the Uconnect system. We also have engine power, horsepower right there, tire pressure, coolant temperature, transmission temperature, oil pressure, oil life, battery voltage, etc. Performance page very specifically gives you top speed that you've hit. That was not my top speed, mind you, that was someone else. We also have reaction time, lap timers, 0 to 60, 0 to 100 times, 1/8 mile timers, 1/4 mile timers, braking distance timers, etc., current G-force and peak G-force. We have a driver assistance readout, so if we did have the adaptive cruise control enabled in this vehicle, or if we had our blind spot monitoring systems available, then it would show you what those systems were doing. Then we go right back to fuel economy. We get 2 different readouts, one with or without the current fuel economy listed right over there on the right. Moving out to the steering wheel, we have Chrysler's latest corporate steering wheel. It's an almost 3-spoke affair with this split spoke right down here at the bottom. Paddle shifters on the back, down on this side, up on that side right over there. That same 5-button arrangement I showed you earlier over here. Direct access buttons to the phone hang-up, pickup, and voice command button. Chrysler likes to split the buttons for the standard cruise control from the adaptive cruise control. So if you don't get the adaptive cruise control in your vehicle, these would be just blank buttons right down here. If you want standard cruise control, you turn it on and off right here, set the speed right with these buttons, go up and down, cancel or resume. If you want adaptive cruise control, you press this button right here, and then you use these same set buttons, but you don't press the center button. You change your distance with these 2 buttons right over here, cancel and resume like normal. If you want to switch between radar adaptive cruise control and standard cruise control, you simply hit this button right up here. That will turn it off. You hit it again, turn it on, and you're in regular cruise control mode. If there was one thing 1970s American cars were known for, it was for having huge trunks. But this 2015 Challenger beats that 1971 Challenger with 16.2 cubic feet of trunk space. Even though this trunk is not shaped in the most convenient fashion, it is positively enormous when you compare it to the Mustang or the Camaro. Like I said earlier, the trunk is more of a trunk well than your average trunk hatch like you'll find on a modern vehicle. That means that you really have to put the bags into the trunk. This entire 26-inch roller bag practically disappears from the camera angle when you put it inside the trunk. You can very easily put it on its side right there as well. If I lift up the cargo load floor, you don't find a spare tire on our particular version. It's because of the size of the tires. However, there is some additional storage, so I could put a 24-inch roller bag in that position and still close the trunk. Could also do that with a 26-inch roller bag. When it comes to my exclusive trunk comfort index, I'll give this 9 out of 10 points. I was going for 10 out of 10 points, but then I noticed that there is actually no handle to help you close this trunk lid, either on the inside or on the outside. That leaves you to paw on the painted surfaces or on that spoiler to help close the trunk lid. Even though the shape of this trunk and the trunk opening is not as efficient as a more modern design, we still gain points for the overall size of this trunk. We also gain a lot of points for these hidden hinges, which don't hit your cargo when you're trying to close the trunk lid. Let's talk about the 2 most important things first, going and stopping. Going is incredibly easy in any version of the Challenger. Even that base V6 version has more get up and go than you might think because of the 8-speed automatic transmission. With 485 horsepower under this hood, it should be no surprise that I ran from 0 to 60 in 4.1 seconds with absolutely 0 problem. And that's not using the launch control system, that's just leaving it in drive, mashing the go pedal, and counting the seconds. Traction is obviously a big problem in the high horsepower versions of the Challenger, because we only have 245 width tires on this version, and we have 275 width tires in the Hellcat. I suspect that if you put wider tires in the Challenger, you could probably run from 0 to 60 in about 3.8 seconds. My suspicion is based on the fact that the 0 to 30 time is a little bit longer than I thought it would be in the Challenger, because first gear, you spend an awful lot of time spinning your wheels. The car is really searching for traction almost throughout the entire first gear band. By the time you hit second gear, there's a little bit of a traction problem, but most of it's already gone. So second gear, third gear, fourth gear, you have decent engagement. The only thing you need to know about this automatic transmission is you have to be very ginger with the throttle in first gear, because first gear is really low, we have an awful lot of power under the hood, and we only have those 245 with tires in the back, so it's really easy to get your rear end swung out if you're not being very careful in first gear. Personally, I like to keep all the electronic control systems on in the vehicle because it can really save your bacon, especially in slippy roadways. Putting this performance into perspective, this ran just about as fast 0 to 60 as a BMW M6 or a Jaguar XKS. Now those were faster than this, but the difference is much smaller than you might think. Wider tires would also likely help the braking score in this vehicle. I'm going to give this 6 out of 10 points when it comes to braking, only because the lighter vehicles in this segment do stop sooner. Braking fade resistance is very, very good in the Challenger. That was a complaint about the previous generation of the Challenger, especially in the SRT form, was that the brakes weren't really up to the task. However, in this particular form, the brakes are definitely upgraded. So we have slotted rotors in this vehicle, 4-piston Brembo calipers all the way around. Stopping is absolutely no problem. Fade resistance is no problem, but when you take a look at the distance scores compared to something like a Camaro or the Mustang, then the braking distances are longer than those other options. If you move up to the Hellcat or the SRT version with a 6.4-liter V8 engine, then the braking score improves to 7 out of 10 points because we get not only wider tires, but we also get yet more improved brake rotors. We get 6-piston calipers in the Hellcat and the SRT model. The Challenger is big and it drives big, but that really shouldn't be a surprise because this is the largest of the American two-door vehicles. When it comes to handling, I'll give this 7 out of 10 points. Handling is certainly improved over the last generation of the Challenger. This feels more sorted, even though we now have electric power steering rather than hydraulic power steering. The winding mountain roads that we're on right now are not necessarily the natural habitat for the Challenger because this is a big vehicle and it certainly drives big out on these winding mountain roads. The flip side of that is an excellent ride score. I'm going to give this 9 out of 10 points when it comes to the ride, because this is the kind of vehicle that you could commute daily in without bruising your kidneys. The Challenger's long wheelbase and the overall weight of this vehicle combine to give you that excellent ride score. It really helps soak up the bumps and imperfections on the road, especially during a daily commute that would really tend to annoy me in a really firmly sprung Camaro or a firmly sprung Mustang. The body is very well controlled even in this version. There's essentially no body roll when we go around these tight corners that we're on right here. And if you take a look at the Hellcat or the SRT version, then the suspensions are even more firm than this. Those are not necessarily daily driver territory in my mind, but they're probably a little bit more likely to be a daily driver than something along the lines of the high horsepower versions of the Camaro or the Mustang, because those are even firmer. When it comes to road noise, I'll give this 8 out of 10 points. We scored 73 decibels at 50 miles an hour, which may sound a little bit loud, but most of the entries in this segment are a little bit louder than your average mid-size sedan when it comes to cabin noise. Part of that is engine noise, but of course we do have an incredible engine noise coming from this 6.4-liter V8 engine. But part of it is also road noise, because we don't have quite as much sound deadening material in the wheel wells as you'll find in your average mid-size sedan. The next score may surprise you, but I'll actually give this 10 out of 10 points when it comes to fuel economy. You can thank the 8-speed automatic transmission and the cylinder deactivation system in most of the V8 engines for that. Some important considerations are the fact that the Hellcat does not get a cylinder deactivation system, and none of the V8 engines with the manual transmission get the cylinder deactivation system. So it's really just the 5.7, the 6.4-liter engine, and the automatic transmission only. The reason for that is it's much easier for the computer to control the cylinder deactivation system if it can also control the shifting of the transmission. What may surprise you is on a one-way journey in this vehicle, about 50 miles long on level highway, that's Highway 101 in the Bay Area, with the cruise control set to 68 miles an hour, I averaged 27.9 miles per gallon, which is incredible for a 485 horsepower 6.4-liter V8 engine. That high fuel economy was all possible because this engine spent its entire time in 8th gear and most of its time in cylinder deactivation mode, operating on just 4 cylinders. Personally, I think my favorite version out on the road is the 485 horsepower version of the SRT model. That would be the 6.4-liter V8, not the 707 horsepower Hellcat, because I think I'd probably kill myself in that just a little bit sooner. The reason I would get the SRT version over this version is because we get the larger brakes. We also get slightly wider tires all the way around. Those 275 with tires really make a big difference when it comes to handling out on the road and being able to control all 485 horsepower. If you're after the ultimate donut machine or the ultimate drift machine, or you just want something that's a little bit more lively in the rear, then get this version. Get the Scat Pack, don't get the SRT, because the 245 with tires really play to that segment. Pricing for 2015 starts at $26,995. That is higher than the Camaro or the Mustang. The next step up from that base SXT model is the SXT Plus at $29,995. It gives you a few more standard features and the ability to add a few more options. The RT version is the first version with the V8 engine. That'd be the 5.7-liter V8 engine, $31,495. There's also an RT Plus version, which does the same sort of thing that you get in the SXT and the SXT Plus. Opens the door to a few more options, gives you a few more standard features. That's $34,495. The version we're taking a look at right here is an interesting twist for the 2015 model year, and this is the RT with the Scat pack added to it. $38,495 is the starting price, and it's basically an RT model with the larger engine in it. You get the 6.4-liter Hemi V8 instead of the 5.7-liter Hemi V8. That next jump up is the SRT 392, same engine as I said before, with suspension improvements, some interior improvements, but most importantly, wider tires all the way around. That will set you back $45,995, and even though you don't get more power than this, it is going to be faster 0 to 60 because you get more traction in the rear. You also get better handling figures. The model we're taking a look at right here is just a little bit more expensive than that base SRT 392 because this is an essentially fully loaded Scat pack. Comes in just over $48,000. If this isn't batshit crazy enough for you, Chrysler would love to sell you an SRT Hellcat, and that's that 707 horsepower version, essentially the same in terms of handling and traction ability as that SRT 392, but with a much more powerful engine under the hood. That comes in at a strangely reasonable $59,995. If you want to add the automatic transmission to that, you can for $2,000 extra, and with all the options added up, including the improved interior in that Hellcat model, it'll set you back $67,000. Of course, all these prices are before incentives and before dealer-added markups. You will find some incentives at the bottom of the food chain, and you'll find added markups from the dealer at the top of the food chain. Keeping in mind what I said earlier about the Mustang and the Camaro not really being the same kind of vehicle, the Camaro starts a little bit less than the Challenger at $23,705, although you get more standard feature content in the Challenger than you do in the Chevy, which brings their adjusted price to about the same. Chevy's Camaro 1SS model starts at $33,505. That is going to be faster than the Challenger RT. Keep in mind the Challenger is a little heavy for its size. Continuing up the Chevy food chain, the ZL1, which is insanely fast, is $55,505. That is faster than the 6.4-liter V8 version that we're taking a look at here, but not quite as fast to 60 as the Hellcat. In an odd twist, the most expensive Camaro is not necessarily the fastest Camaro, but it does handle a little bit better than the others, and that would be the Z28 model at $72,305. The Challenger SRT Hellcat is a little bit less expensive than that. The Z28 is lighter, it's faster, it also feels much more direct, it handles much better out on the track, but the Challenger Hellcat is faster in a straight line. Thanks to its overall size, its suspension tuning, and everything about the way that Camaro is put together, it handles better than the Challenger out on your favorite track. Now, the Challenger may be faster to 60 in certain configurations when you compare it to the Camaro, but it's not going to be as quick out on the road. However, the Challenger has a much better ride on the road or off the road than that Camaro. So this is an awful lot more compliant, it's an awful lot more comfortable to drive around than the Camaro. The suspension also feels a little bit better put together. The Camaro feels a little bit out of sorts, especially on broken pavement. It's a little bit unique in this segment. The Mustang actually feels a little bit more put together, especially on broken pavement. Ford's Mustang is more different from the Challenger than the Camaro is from the Challenger because the Mustang now has a 4-cylinder turbocharged engine under the hood. That's made possible in the Mustang because it is significantly lighter than the Challenger. It's also significantly smaller than the Challenger. It feels an awful lot more nimble, it feels an awful lot lighter, it feels an awful lot more at home, especially on small, narrow, winding mountain roads. Depending on how you configure it, the Mustang is a little bit less expensive, but the Challenger is more practical than the Mustang with a 3-person rear bench seat, so you can actually put 5 people in the back of this vehicle. More importantly than the 5 people, however, you can put 4 adults in relative comfort in the Challenger, and you just can't do that in the Mustang. At the moment, there is no high horsepower Mustang to compare with the Hellcat version of the Challenger. That's because the Mustang has just received a complete redesign for the 2015 model year. Don't expect Ford to rest on their laurels, however. Do expect something very competitive from them in the near future. The Mustang, of course, handles considerably better, and I would really call that Mustang the American interpretation of BMW's current 4 Series coupe. That brings me right back to my German parallels, because that Mustang really is the BMW 4 Series coupe from America, and this really is the BMW 6 Series coupe in America. It handles an awful lot like that larger BMW coupe. They really reminded me a great deal of one another out on the road, except this is significantly cheaper than the BMW, of course. My 2 favorite entries in this segment right now are, interestingly enough, the Ford Mustang with their brand new turbocharged 4-cylinder engine and this Challenger with the 6.4-liter V8. Although I think I would get the Challenger SRT, which has the upgraded tires and the upgraded braking package, versus what we're looking at right here. The Mustang is the more direct feeling vehicle. It handles better out on the road. It's an awful lot of fun out on the road as well, but it's only fun for two people. Those back seats really are not very usable in that Mustang. And the Challenger is a very different kind of vehicle. This is a high horsepower coupe that is incredibly comfortable. This is very, very easy to live with, either in the Scat Pack version or in the SRT version. Even though the SRT version does get a slightly differently tuned suspension, it's still very, very easy to live with as a daily driver kind of vehicle, and you get an incredible amount of power. We also get very usable back seats. You actually can put 5 adults in the Challenger and go away for lunch. You could also put 3 or 4 adults in here and go out for a weekend because we have that huge trunk in the back. What's unique about the Challenger is that this makes 485 horsepower and 2-door styling fit into the average person's life relatively easily. You don't have to do too much modification to your daily routine to jam kids in the back, to jam people in the back if you're going out to lunch. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Chrysler is incredibly good at doing batshit crazy. All they have to do to make themselves the craziest auto manufacturer on the planet is to jam that Hellcat engine inside the Jeep Grand Cherokee, and they would be set for a really long time. The reason I say that is because not only can you get the 485 horsepower 6.4-liter V8 engine from this vehicle in the Dodge Charger, which is the 4-door sedan version, but you can also get the 707 horsepower Hellcat engine in that Dodge Charger. Since the 1980s or 1990s, pony cars continued to exist to give Americans some rear-wheel drive fun with a large dollop of power. But that's no longer necessary because Dodge does have that Charger, and I think I would take the Charger SRT over the Challenger SRT. That would be a really tough choice in my book, but the Charger SRT is one of my favorite cars for the 2014-2015 calendar years, and it's really easy to see why. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes, and this has been the 2015 Dodge Challenger Scat Pack. Go ahead and click that subscribe banner at the bottom of your screen so you can be updated on all of my latest videos. You can also find me over at facebook.com/AlexandAutos, over at Twitter as AlexandAutos, and you can always email your questions to alex@alexandautos.com. I'll see you next week. The best part about the Challenger is that batshit insane 707 horsepower Hellcat exists. The reason for that is even though I would buy this 6.4-liter V8 version instead of that 6.2-liter engine because I value my life, it makes the 485 horsepower Challenger seem like the rational choice. So when your grandmother or your old maiden aunt asks you, do you really need 485 horsepower, you just tell them, it wasn't the biggest engine option. You could have bought the 707 horsepower version, but you were being practical and rational and bought just under 500 horsepower instead.